Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. He'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Today I'm here with one of the Evoke Management part-time directors, Nick Thompson. So Nick is one of the team. He works with a portfolio of SME companies, helping them with their business growth and business journey. And what we're going to talk about today, hopefully, Nick, welcome, by the way, we're going to be talking about your time as managing director of Hull City Football Club. Now, I'm not a particular football fan, or I don't really follow football, which might shock some people. What I'm really interested in is to find out a bit more about your experience to take on that role and any particular business learnings from it, which might be interesting and useful for anyone that happens to listen to this. So Nick, welcome. And please tell us how you came to be the MD of Hull City.
Okay, well, actually, it's interesting you say that you're not interested in football. I've been a football fan all my life, but when I went to Hull City, I really didn't know anything about running a football club. And how I got to the role was I was part of Kingston Communications, or KCOM Group, and I looked after their local business unit. And I suggested the introduction of executive sponsorship. So larger clients getting somebody on the executive team to sponsor their account. And because it was my idea, I picked the clients that I fancied. And it just so happened that one of the clients I was looking after ended up running Hull City Football Club. And so we had a relationship that we kind of built and worked at. And eventually in the 12-13 season, it led me to being asked if I'd like to go and run the club, which as a fan, I kind of took about 3 milliseconds to say yes, which is not a good negotiating position.
How long have you been a fan of Hull then?
Well, so I've been a football fan all my life. Actually, I fell in love with Hull City on a rainy Friday evening in October 2010. It was away at Preston. I represented KCOM, who were the stadium sponsors. It was a Friday night. It was like a 3-day camel trek to drive to Preston. It rained all the way there. I got there about 5 minutes before the kickoff. The guy in the boardroom bar called me mate, which I particularly didn't like. And we got battered for 85 minutes of the game, and we ended up winning 2-0. And it was as we were kind of applauding the away fans at the end of the game, I just thought, this is my team. This is the team I love. And, you know, it's like, it wasn't a matter of that I chose to go out and support Hull City. I was engaged with them, but I just kind of decided that was my team that night.
Oh, great. So that's perfect. And then you become the MD. So
yes.
What was that like?
Well, so it felt like a learning right angle at the time because, you know, I went into a situation which I was comfortable on the commercial side. I understood the commercial side, particularly as having been the stadium sponsor. I understood how the commercial team worked, and I could see where there were areas where you could improve their performance, improve their kind of business thinking. But, you know, on the day-to-day operations, and particularly on the elite performance side with the football team, then it was an entirely different task. But I was going to be working with, or got to work with, an extremely experienced football manager, Steve Bruce. And he'd been around for a long time. It wasn't his first rodeo. And so we got an opportunity to talk and share a lot of things. And so in the football side, it was about learning from Steve. But then on the, if you like, the back office, the sports science elements, it was about trying to bring some process and some rigor to the process. So, for example, in terms of scouting, you know, you could have a report from a scout on a post-it note. You could have a 6-page essay, but the analysts had no kind of common denominators to evaluate the performance on. So how could we create a template which gave us a kind of apples and apples comparison? So, you know, invest time with the analysts, sit down, identify the attributes for every single position and write them down. So the scouts then had a form. So if you're looking at a right back, what are the 10 most important attributes you need to look in a right back? How does this player measure up on those elements? small bit of kind of space for some freehand comments and such at the end. But suddenly you were giving the analysts a set of comparable reports. So therefore, the process was, if you liked a player, you had 3 scouts reports. Well, if all 3 reports then measured up, you could then move it up the chain and process it. With the medical side of all the sports science thing is, how do you kind of bring in almost like kind of test equipment that can help measure the performance? So if you had soft tissue injuries, how can we look at reducing the recovery time for soft tissue injuries? Better still, how can we look at equipment that maybe helps us spot the potential for injury before it happens? So talking with developers, we got into a relationship with a company called Smart Gate, which, if my memory serves me correct, reduced our soft injuries by about 30%, simply because we were tracking how the players moved when they were in good shape. And if there was any deviation from that, we could then start to look and treat in advance of the soft injury happening. So it was a case of listening, bringing some kind of discipline and some form of structure where it was applicable, but then kind of making that work for the benefit of the team.
No, great. Well, it sounds like, as you say, a right angle turn in terms of trying to get your head around some of these aspects. But you would have thought some of this stuff would have been in place already, given the kind of whole methodology of running a club and going through this process you're describing about picking people for the team. I would have thought that's already in place. Doesn't necessarily.
Well, you'd like to think that, wouldn't you? But no, it was. I was amazed at how little was in place. And in actual fact, I mean, as I got into the role, I then started trying to learn from other sports. So trying to benchmark our situation. And, football is not really at the forefront. Obviously you look at the big clubs, the Manchester Uniteds and Cities, the Liverpools, and they had a lot. But, back in 2012, you had rugby union teams using cryogenic chambers to aid recovery times. They were pretty much unheard of certainly in English football at that time. They started to come in over the next 2 or 3 seasons. And so it was a great opportunity to benchmark those kind of levels against other sports and just check that you were doing the best in class.
Yeah, sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So what are the other kind of highlights for you in terms of the time you spent running Hull?
So I think one of the great lessons that I learned, which is applicable in business, is working for the benefit of the team. So, when you make decisions, you do it to benefit the team. So, if you've got a player who will not fit what is needed for that match, even though they're your star player, they have to sit out that game because you're actually looking at what will benefit the team. If you've got somebody who is a bad influence in the dressing room, you don't want them around because they're going to have a negative effect on the team. And, when you take that into business and you think about how many times businesses accept poor performers, don't deal with them because they don't really want the confrontation. But actually what you're saying to everybody else on the team is, oh, that's okay, you can get away with that as well. Rather than, look, we are creating an elite performance environment here, and we deal with these things because we want the team to be stronger and better. Where you have people whose performance has maybe gone off the boil, you deal with them because you want the team to be performing. And I think, that was probably my biggest abiding memory from football, is working for the benefit of the team and making sure that you can perform at the very top level, match in, match out, week in, week out.
It's quite interesting as well, because if you're comparing that to the approach in business, you're getting everyone lined up to be their best for a short amount of time. In reality, for the time they're playing, you've got all the other time behind the scenes. In business, we don't generally do that, do we? We're in theory having to perform the whole time, because that's the nature of what we do in our roles, or the business does. So it's quite interesting how, if you think about a comparison, how can you mimic that, the focus on the things that happen in the changing rooms or off the pitch that actually make you make those decisions to improve the performance on the pitch. How do you what's the analogy there between business?
Well, it very much so. But if you look at a match as a kind of a business event, you've got open play, you've got set piece plays. So yeah, salespeople are working all the time, but they actually come up to set piece plays when they need to make a presentation to a client or go in to win a new piece of business. So it's how do you make sure that they're best prepared for that? You think about football, where you will practice or train corners over and over again. You'll train free kicks over and over again. How many times do we kind of train business people for the presentations?
Yep.
How many times do we go and say, all right, we could do this better? Or actually, how many times do we analyze that presentation and say, well, this bit worked, this bit didn't, we need to refine it. And so it's that, yes, a football match is a 90-minute event and you may play 2 in the course of a week. Business is every day, but actually, in fact, business is made up of set piece events where actually you can train, you can hone those activities. So exactly what you want to do. I mean, there was a great piece of learning that came from rugby union, which I drew on during that time. Clive Woodward, he had this teacup theory, thinking correctly under pressure. So you did something so many times that when it came to the real thing, you didn't have to think about it, you just did it. That's what a lot of sports coaching is. It's breaking actions down into small replicable parts. Well, how many times do we do that in our business delivery? We're starting to get to that point now where we're looking at customer journeys and breaking them down, identifying choke points. But that's just something you live with every day in a kind of elite performance environment.
Yeah, sure. I've read Clive's book actually, and it's thinking clearly under pressure, isn't it? Those teacup moments. I think there's a lot of learning in that, and I think we often in business don't often rehearse things as we could do in terms of different scenarios, and especially at the moment. I mean, we've had so much change and so much uncertainty. I think anyone running a business has probably had many of these moments where thinking clearly under that pressure of what's in front of them is super important. And I think, although we don't know, how things might develop over the next week, the next month, when there's still uncertainty in the business environment, we can go through various scenarios and ultimately, thinking about different sectors, there's only going to be certain things that are going to happen. You might win more business, you might win less business, you might not be able to deliver what you expected. There's actually not that many scenarios that you can't rehearse or think about and then talk to your team about, okay, well, if this happens, what do we do? If this happens, what do we do? And just have an approach and de-risk the fact that you've got this change. I think that's definitely quite an interesting concept to reiterate, from the sport into the business world, is those teacup moments. How do you actually continue to think clearly under pressure that a lot of people have been under and will continue to be?
Absolutely. And, little things like, battle sheets for customer service people, so understanding what are the strengths and weaknesses of your competitors so you know how to handle them, having where you're engaged in a contact center, you know what you want to say. You have a flow chart of taking people through a process, because when you've got somebody angry on the phone or on the Twitter, your mind tends to go to a bit of a mush. Whereas if you've got it placed that right, you're in this situation, these are the steps you take. It just helps you go through that process. So there's lots of little steps you can put in to guide you through that. I think the other thing, one of the other great lessons which came out of Clive's book was the concept of energy vampires. People who just suck the energy out of a situation. And, when you take that and look in at situations in business, in sport, and you can suddenly see people who, on the face of it, look good people, but actually what they do is they just suck the energy out of everybody else. And that was a great learning to come out of that book. Yeah,
sure. So your time at Hull then, what would have been your biggest challenging moments, do you think, in that environment?
I think the biggest challenge was obviously in the first season to get promoted to the Premier League. And the biggest or the most challenging moment in that period was actually on the final day of the season. So forgive me as I go through the football now, but 4 games from the end, we were 6 points ahead of the club in third place, who were Watford, and we had 4 games to play. So it's like, we had the whip hand. With our first game of that 4-game sequence, we were away at Wolves, who were already relegated. And one of the things with Steve was that he was a safety first manager. So his mindset was, if we go to Wolves and we don't concede, we'll get a point, and it keeps us in a strong position. Whereas my view was, Steve, they're relegated, let's go out and stuff them. Funnily enough, the manager's view won. And so we went to the game looking for a draw. We kept the game tight until about the 70th minute, halfway through the second half. They scored, and suddenly it's like, So we ended up the game with 4, if not 5 attackers on the pitch, trying to get an equaliser. And, another thing, another great learning is footballers are great if you ask them to do a job, but there are far fewer of them who are able to adapt mid-game to a different job.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to make the change. Anyway, it wasn't too bad because Watford lost that night as well. So it's like, who cares? We're still 6 points in. There's only 3 games to go now.
Yeah.
Our next game, funnily enough, was home to Bristol City, already relegated. Friday night at the K-Com, we got away with a 0-0 draw.
Mm-hmm.
On the Saturday, Watford won. So now we've got 2 games left, but the gap is only 4 points. It's getting a little bit kind of tense at this stage.
Yeah.
So, but who cares? Because our next game, our penultimate game of the season, is away to Barnsley, already relegated. We went away to Barnsley, and you've probably heard the saying that they looked like they met in the car park. Well, our boys didn't look like they didn't even know each other. Barnsley beat us 2-0, Watford won. So we went into the final game of the season, and we're 1 point ahead of Watford. Our final game is at home to Cardiff City, the champions. Watford's final game is at Leeds, who is Hull's. If you had a team to hate at Hull, it was Leeds United. It was a toss-up between Leeds United and Sheffield United, but at home to Leeds, and it was we had to get the equal or better result than them.
Yeah. And
so that week, the pressure that was in the camp, and that sequence of 3 results was all about the pressure, all about, pressure being on people. They were trying to overthink things. They were trying too hard. Anyway, we spent that whole week trying to manage that pressure. And so we got to the final game. We're home to Cardiff. And we went in at 0-0 at half time. But the Watford game, the Watford keeper had got injured during the warm-up. They had to bring on the substitute keeper. He'd been injured in a horrible incident about halfway through the first half. They had 15 or 16 minutes of injury time. So they were just finishing the first half as we went out for the second half. Cardiff took the lead. It's all gone horribly wrong. We equalised. It's not so bad. We then went ahead. And with literally at the dying breath of the game, we were awarded a penalty against Cardiff. Fans came onto the pitch, which has a bearing later on. But we had a German striker who'd come on as substitute. We all know the story of Germans and penalties. Well, we were the exception that proved the rule. He missed the penalty, went up the other end. He played the ball onto one of our defenders' hands. Cardiff got a penalty, and the game finished 2-2.
Wow.
And the only reason we had time to go up the other end for the Cardiff penalty was because the fans had come on the pitch and the referee had added time on to allow them to get off. Right. So we're then watching this kind of closing 15 or 16 minutes of the Watford Leeds game. And, what it looks like the Alamo. Watford are kind of bombarding the Leeds goal with everything. And suddenly, and I think it was about 10 minutes to go. I don't actually know the time because it all kind of got lost. But with about 10 minutes to go, Leeds managed to clear the ball out to the halfway line to Ross McCormack, who is a footballer that I've never particularly liked. But at this precise moment, I learnt to love him because the Watford reserve keeper has kind of come halfway up the pitch to kind of, egg his team on and to pick up any loose balls, play like the keeper sweeper model. Ross McCormack sees him off the line and lobs a glorious goal over his head. Nice. At that moment, pandemonium broke loose. We had El Mohammadi, our Egyptian kind of wingback. He was auditioning for Strictly Come Dancing live on the TV. Everybody's going mad. There's fans everywhere. And it was just like a complete meltdown. And that evening, we had to do a players' testimonial dinner where I spent the whole night being hugged by middle-aged men. I've never been so happy in my life. And it was literally 2 a.m. in the morning. I sat on my daughter lived just around the corner from the stadium, and I sat on her decking with a big fat cigar, a Monte Cristo number 4, and a Coke Zero, thinking, wow, we have just done something, pretty incredible. It's the first time that Hull had ever been promoted automatically to the Premier League. We'd done it with a team that were amongst the favourites for relegation at the end of the season. But then, of course, we had to start building again for the next season, because the objective was to stay in the Premier League. And we actually built a squad. We had the second lowest wage bill in the league. We got a squad that got to the FA Cup final and stayed up in 16th place in the league. So, it was the build up to that week where you're going to all the pressure, all the expectation, just trying to get people to breathe and do what they did naturally.
Wow. No, that's a great story, Nick. And you must have been absolutely buzzing on the back of that. I can't imagine the feeling you guys must have had doing that for your favourite club as well. It's fantastic. We're actually gonna run out of time shortly, because there's been a great story. Time.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
What the two other things I want to just touch on briefly, Nick. Owners and managing directors. We often have this in businesses.
Yes.
Any particular insights from dealing with the owners of the club while you're running it that was of interest?
So I think two very quick. One is, that is the most important relationship there is. You have to have a relationship where there is trust in that relationship. And, Dr. Alam at Hull, he afforded me an immense amount of trust. And that was a privilege which I took. And I tried to repay that privilege by making sure that he understood, if you like, the impact of everything. So making sure that I business cased everything and had good communication with him, and laid things out in very easily understood terms, because he was a man who didn't really understand football, didn't want to understand football, but he understood business. And so it's like, put things into terms that he understood.
Sure. So trust is one thing. Anything else?
And I think the second thing is like, understand what the owner wants to achieve. Yeah. So understand what is their aims and their ambition. So when I started at the club, as I said, we had a team that were amongst the favourites for relegation. I asked them, I want to get to the Premier League. So it's like, whenever we were having a debate about something, taking him back to that core objective, you want to get promotion. This is what we have to do promotion. And that, just having that kind of, it was almost like a plan and a point of focus, a strategic objective, and make sure that everything fed back to that.
It's quite interesting, actually, because I'm just thinking, aligning that with business objectives. We always talk to business owners as a new client. What are you trying to get out of this? Not necessarily just the business performance, but what do you want out of this in terms of, profit, lifestyle, exit, succession? What is it you're after? And I think we often find the more time we spend on that, and the more time understanding why that's important, means everything else that we go and try and execute is aligned and works, because we understand what that reasoning is. So there's some fantastic analogies there, I think, between sport and business, and a cracking story as well, Nick, on what you achieved. We're gonna just literally close out now. Any very brief tip for anyone from your learnings of sport? What's your number one thing you'd say to any business owner?
So it's kind of, I'll do 1A and 1B. It's like, have a plan, execute it, and focus. It's so easy to get sucked off into other things, whereas it's focus on delivering that plan and achieving your objective. That's it in a nutshell. If you've got a plan, then you can execute on that plan. And if you look at the successful clubs, regardless of the league, it's the clubs with a plan that do well.
Excellent. No, that's great. Great tip, Nick. Well, Nick, I've really enjoyed talking to you about this and the story.
Pleasure.
So thanks very much, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks.
Brilliant. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.